Welcome back, guys, to the Beyond Condition podcast, the voice of bodybuilding. And today's voice is a brand new guest from across the pond. Dr. Gabrielle is joining us today, and we're going to be talking about essentially the diet culture. But there's, I'm sure you'll agree, plenty of tangents and things we can discuss under that umbrella, as it were. But thank you, of course, for your time today, first of all.
Thank you for having me.
It's really, really cool to actually connect with people that are across the world because you get so many different insights. And with the bodybuilding space, it's certainly a mission of mine where bodybuilding is very insular, as it were. And it's like, actually, what can we bring to that world that's maybe people aren't thinking about when they're in the competitive realm? For yourself, are you working with lifestyle clients? Are you working with competitors as well? Or is it a bit of a mix?
Well, gosh, I've been coaching now for 7 or so years. And when I started, I worked primarily with clients that were highly active, sometimes recreationally competitive in the physique world, and by and large were focused on physique change. And so I was a macros based, more often than not, fat loss coach. And over the last several years, I've transitioned to working with folks who feel really trapped in chronic dieting and feel preoccupied with tracking macros and controlling their body size, and who want to transition away from that approach to something that feels more balanced. And they still want to be active, they still want to have a nutritious dietary pattern, but they've reached a crossroads where their previous habits are no longer helping them.
Yeah, it is certainly. I think actually you've raised a relevant point there. Across that statement, it's like when you finish with competitive bodybuilding, or perhaps you're flirting with the idea of that, it's quite a scary spot because also I'm sure you picked this up, the identity shift. Who am I without
Yes.
knowing, you're known as the competitor, you're known as the bodybuilder. Maybe, that's been over several years, a large portion of your life. And then it's like, who am I? And of course, the food pathologies, potentially the disordered route can come off the back of that as well, because you're losing your purpose, aren't you?
Yes, exactly. And people's lives can become so small and sort of myopic, and they lose their the other aspects of themselves. Their lives become less complex, because they have sort of this singular goal. And with that also comes the overvaluation and really overinterpretation of their appearance. So not only are you losing your identity in terms of, the habits, like the behaviors, but also there's fear about judgment. There is internalized weight stigma. So people are judging themselves as their physique changes. So there is really a loss of both internal identity and then the way that we think we're going to be perceived by others. And we don't feel as safe in our place in society, as equally for men and women for different reasons. But yeah, it can become something that really reduces someone's quality of life, their ability to connect with the people and the things that are important to them. But there's a lot of fear that keeps them stuck.
Yeah, it is as well. It's when you're in this realm, you don't maybe see it happening to yourself. So your narrative changes, it starts off as this exciting endeavor, and it's like, wow, you can get stage lean. And of course, the purpose that comes off the back of that, and suddenly you're stepping on stage, and it's like, wow, maybe you're the talk of the town. And for me personally, it was like when I first started out, I'm somebody. I'm actually doing something with my life,
Yeah.
as it were. And I've certainly had to challenge my own narrative multiple times over the 12 years of doing it. But I feel like, there's going to be people listening that are in the depths of it. And I've mentioned this before. You sort of feel like you don't have time to address potentially, the disordered side of things, your relationship with food, yourself, the scale weight, the list goes on because you're either off season or you're prep. And it's quite hard to actually challenge your narrative when you're within the repetitive, nature of bodybuilding. Do you find that that's something you've come across as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's, I think a lot of folks, whether they're health professionals or competitors, or even people who are, fitness enthusiasts, as you mentioned, it's a slow process. It's sort of like, the frog in the hot water, and you keep increasing the heat.
Yeah.
in part because a lot of these behaviors are so normalized. Even when there's a non-competitive recreational exerciser, they start working with a coach immediately. It's macros and, very specific timing on eating. And the reality is the majority of people don't need that approach, but it has become the default. And so when you feel like that is the default, that's the correct thing to do. Now moving away from that feels like something wrong, and we lose the ability to sense and respond to our internal signals because we rely so heavily on macros and timing. And over time, there's a slow creep of, well, now because you have to be really stringent about your macros, you can't go out to eat, you can't be spontaneous. So that starts to reduce your social life. And then you start having worsened body image and start feeling even more insecure. And then that can affect your romantic relationships. And you run out of time and energy to engage in other hobbies because you have to go to the gym for a couple hours a day and you need to meal prep and you're tired and you don't want to do something that's going to interfere with a training plan. And
Yeah.
I'm speaking from experience. Like, this was my
Yeah.
progression. Yeah. And so, when I started to travel for work, that's when I really started to realize I was holding back on so many experiences because I didn't want to interfere with my training and I didn't want to screw up my macros. And I wasn't feeling better about myself. I wasn't feeling more confident in my body. At times, I liked the way that my body looked more, but that is not synonymous with feeling confident. And I gave up hobbies because they were too sedentary or I didn't have time. And so, really, like, I lost these parts of myself that were so important to me up until the time that I started to become so focused on my physique. But when you're in that place, like, yeah, that has become your identity. And I think in order to sort of like survive the cognitive dissonance, we have to try and justify it and say, well, I'm just really dedicated, this is what it looks like, and other people don't work hard enough. And I think it's difficult for people to actually acknowledge the painful reality that this has gotten out of hand and I'm not really enjoying my life and I don't know what else to do.
Yeah, it is that, isn't it? It's like, well, what else would I do? Because even if
Mm-hmm.
you've done, say one season, a prep and an off season, it's still very much, this is the thing with bodybuilding. It's so immersive, as you described there.
Mm-hmm.
You're tracking your food, you're doing your training, everything, food prep, steps, water consumption, etc., etc. Now, that can be very purposeful. It can give you a lot because suddenly you can understand nutrition, what that looks like. But then, of course, with the competitive side, you're then going to that extreme. So I almost liken it to you're doing a diet and then you're going way past that you would in a standard diet, as it were. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where we start to see potentially things change. And then it's that post-show period. If you're then going to go into an off season, and it's very hard to work on that mindset and actualize it because you're so in it. And like you say, you label it as, well, this is my sport. This is bodybuilding. We're all like this. But actually, what I've certainly unearthed over the last few years of doing the podcast is that you can find a level of, finding your why, what you want to gain from doing competitive bodybuilding. And this is I try and phrase it as the healthiest way possible. Because
Mm-hmm.
if you see what I mean, it's not ever going to be healthy, as it were. But of course,
Yeah.
it can bring so much to an individual, but it's hard, isn't it? Because where do you find that? So it's a purposeful pursuit, but you're able to, of course, enhance your life from it rather than, potentially pull your life back, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. I mean, when we look at other, professional athletes, they still have families, they still have off seasons, they make sacrifices in terms of like traveling and things like that. There are seasons when their lives are going to be busier, but they don't put themselves in unnecessarily risky situations. They still use best practices. Like, if you're playing hockey, if you're playing football, you don't go out there without any pads and say, well, I'm just like the hardest core hockey player or football player. Yeah, you're like, no, there are inherent risks to this sport. And the best thing that I can do is to ensure that I'm wearing my pads and that I'm training properly and I'm nourishing myself. The thing with bodybuilding is that, as you mentioned, like, it is inherently risky. It is inherently unhealthy to an extent. I mean, because it's damaging to the body. It is pushing the body to absolute physical limits,
Mm.
and it has objective, measurable consequences to quality of life, mood, hormone profiles, like the whole everything, libido.
Yeah.
So, in the same way, I think it's so important for us to engage in, with informed consent in other sports,
Yeah.
or other endeavors. Like if you're going on a trip and you want to do a really challenging hiking event or something with a guide, that guide is going to have you sign a waiver. They're going to say, hey, these are all the risks. You have to bring enough water. They're not going to let you just go ham and like, dehydrate yourself hiking for 5 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting that in the bodybuilding realm, those risks are not spoken about in quite the same way. I think they're being acknowledged more, but I have yet, well, no, I do know of one company, but I have yet to see it normalized to have people, talk through the risks and benefits, sign a waiver, and provide informed consent
Yeah.
so that they really know what they're getting into.
Yeah, yeah, because it's scary. The industry, it is scary at times. It's certainly part of doing the podcast to, and it's not about trying to bash coaches and all of this type of thing. It's actually to have open conversations like this and talk about things where people are listening, which is an intimate exchange in itself, listening to a podcast and go, actually, I don't know if this is right. Should I be doing this type of stuff? And the thing is, it's where it's unregulated, it's very difficult. You and I can do our best to put things out and have open discussions, but you are dealing with potentially vulnerable people. Bodybuilding attracts a certain personality type. Not everyone, but again,
Mm-hmm.
I talk from experience. It became my thing because I was dealing with a lot of other stuff in my past. And again, it's like you can have this coach come into your life, and it's like, wow, this is God. Suddenly, you're doing PEDs, you're doing your macros, you're doing all these things, and you can get swept up in it, and that's tricky as well because maybe you don't really understand the full, like you say, with the health consequences and things until after the preparation, suddenly you have a thyroid condition or suddenly you've got an eating disorder, etc., etc. And that's difficult. I'm sure you come across this in this space as well.
I love that you pointed out that bodybuilding attracts a certain type of person, that we're working with a vulnerable community in many ways,
Yeah.
because a lot of times people are coming into the bodybuilding community or even working with a regular coach, just an everyday person.
Mm.
They want to change their external appearance because of other stuff going on in their lives. They think that, okay, if I look better, if I like the way that I look more, that means that I'll feel more confident and like the rest of my life will improve. And that is generally not the case. And it can actually worsen someone's body image by increasing their preoccupation with their appearance.
Mm.
And folks who will come into the bodybuilding and fitness world also have very perfectionist tendencies. They tend to be highly self critical. So you have folks that already have a predisposition to develop disordered eating or a clinical eating disorder, that already have a level of body dissatisfaction. And then on top of that, we're adding more risk factors by having them track macros, by having them track their body weight, by having them take pictures. So if we aren't acknowledging that, then we actually are perpetuating harm. And we're not, in my opinion, really fulfilling our duties as health and fitness professionals, because we have a responsibility to help our clients improve their health and wellness and the quality of their lives. But again, because it's something that is so normalized,
Mm.
I don't think people really recognize the risk. They're like, well, macros, there are people that can track macros without an issue, and that is true. But it's so important that we look at the context of the individual and determine whether macros might be another stepping stone toward disordered eating and a worsened body image.
Yeah, for sure. And also, I guess an extension of that, when I've had clients that have been so rigid with a food plan that,
Mm-hmm.
again, that they can't even go outside of that. It's like almost this imprisoned because they've done a preparation on a food plan provided by the coach. Now, what
Yeah.
not only are they building up, sensitivities, slight intolerances, etc., because it's the same foods, rinse and repeat, which there's a place for that to a certain degree. We can include food variety if you're listening, guys. However, a
Yes.
bit of a tangent with that, but they're so the narrative is I have to follow this food plan. And my job personally as a coach, if I'm then taking someone through an off season and I'm taking the reins, it's like, right, let's slowly get to what do macros look like because they don't even know the macro side of things. They're so reliant on,
Yeah.
the coach. And then,
Mhm.
I take people through an off season. By the end of it, they're having off-plan meals. And, they're
Mhm.
going out with their family. They're saying, Sarah, I really enjoyed that meal. And you're going to relate. I'm like, that in itself, it's like a gift from the Lord to take someone from there to there. And it seems like, the outside world wouldn't understand that, but you're going to understand that very well. Even that is huge because we get so imprisoned by it, don't we? It's like if I haven't done this to the gram, I'm unworthy, I shouldn't exist. And it does get like that, doesn't it?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I really thought, even just maybe 5 years ago, I thought I was never going to be able to stop tracking macros. I thought I was never going to be able to eat sort of like, I want to say normally, but I thought I was never going to be able to just eat, like put food on my plate, eat, and then go about my day. I
Yeah.
thought I was never going to break the cycle of extreme restriction and the binging. I really was at a place where I was even working with a coach and saying, like, help me stop tracking macros, but we were still tracking. It was like a hybrid approach. And I just said, I need to stop. Like, it's like trying to help an alcoholic by like giving them a little bit to drink. That was my experience, and it can be a helpful process for some people do it in a stepwise way. But for me, this stepwise approach was dragging out because I just didn't feel safe testing myself like without macros.
Yeah.
And I really just felt desperate. I mean, it felt so hopeless. And I saw the damage that was being done. I saw how much it was controlling so many of my thoughts and my day to day life. And I remember times like in the following months and years where I really committed to, I have to, if I gain weight, I gain weight. Like I have to be willing to contend with whatever's going to happen if I want to be free from this. And I remember times when I would just like eat something and then I'd realize, oh my gosh, I didn't track that. I didn't think about it. I just ate it and then moved on. And now I don't track macros at all. I haven't tracked in a long time. I just eat an amount of food that's on my plate. If I'm full before it's done, I just stop eating. I'm like aware of what I'm eating. I still eat plenty of vegetables and whole grains and whatnot because it feels good.
Yeah.
But it's taken up so much less space in my life now, in my mind, and I don't even actually think about it so much anymore. Like it doesn't strike me, oh my gosh, I just ate a meal and moved on. Now that's how I am every day, and it's not until I stop and think about it and I'm like, wow, not so long ago I never thought I was going to be here. And I started tracking when I was 18,
Wow.
and yeah, I'm going to be 38 next month. So yeah,
Wow.
it was half my life that I spent tracking.
Oh, that is
Mhm.
wild. I'm sitting here 12 years. I mean, wow. As well, it's like again, that's your narrative then, isn't it? Because we go through these phases in life, sort of 0 to 8, you're building your character, you're a child. Then you're exposed to what school brings and all of that. Then you're trying to decide what the hell am I going to do with my life? And then,
Yeah.
depending on when you find something like bodybuilding, it can take up such a huge chunk. But of course, that's when you're an adult a lot of the time. So then
Mhm.
you start to associate with other bodybuilders. Your life is through a coach and all of these things, and then that all adds that almost pad into, okay, so you're here and it's like, well, that's my friends, that's my maybe my job, I've got a coach, and it starts to, and it's almost like suffocation. And you labeled it perfectly, how do I escape this? And that's what it feels like. And again, it's the ownership of that, isn't it? It's like, first of all, I feel like I'm fucking suffocating here. I don't know what to do. Then it's that step of how can we get support and help? And I feel like, if someone's listening and they're in this position, perhaps you have reached out to your coach like Gabrielle, and it's not quite, it's maybe falling on deaf ears to a certain degree. What would you say for if someone is listening and actually it's like, I don't know if I maybe need to step away completely or have a bit of a break. Have you got any sort of logical steps of people where they could sort of head, if you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, first, I would say you're not alone. I have heard from so many clients that they think they're the only ones dealing with this.
Mm.
And so they are afraid or ashamed to talk about it, with their coach or with their other people in their fitness community, because they're looking around and they're like, oh, everyone else just has it together. It seems so easy for them, and I'm struggling. So I found that that is really helpful when I affirm, oh my gosh, no, you're not alone. There are so many people who are silently going through this because they feel the same way that you do. And it's men and women. Like people feel very afraid to talk about things when they think they're going to be perceived as like weak or incapable, and you're none of those things. And what you mentioned, like owning it, I think that's the biggest next step, is to acknowledge that it's going to be really difficult and uncomfortable, and acknowledge the fear. Because that was the big thing. It was like I didn't want to admit to myself that I was afraid of gaining weight,
For sure.
because that seems like an inappropriate thing to say. Like, I'm afraid of gaining fat. I'm afraid of being in a larger body, because that's the society that I was brought up in.
Yeah.
And you have to feel ready then for that to happen. You have to feel ready for your body to change. You have to anticipate that people might say rude things, that you're not going to be getting the same type of compliments and comments that you get. Like, I remember when I was at my leanest, I got stopped at the airport, and one guy was like, oh, are you in the military or something like that, or police force? Like, look at your arms, or in the grocery store. Like, it was like an insane amount of attention, and
Yeah.
that can feel very good.
Mm.
But we really need to, I think, sort of wean ourselves off of that and start looking for the things that you want to do instead, because it can feel also like a huge gap is left behind. If you're like, well, if I'm not training so much, if I'm not competing, if I'm not tracking macros, what am I going to do instead? At some point in your life before you started this, you probably had hobbies. And
Yeah.
it's really important to like get back into those. It's important to find safe people to talk to. It's important to limit contact with the people who have made it clear that they're not safe to talk to. So that might mean, you find another coach. It might mean that you spend less time with certain people at the gym, or that you are cultivating a different social media feed. It's important to expose yourself to other types of communities, to people in different bodies that show that they're enjoying their lives, so that you can start gathering more evidence that your physique doesn't indicate your worth and value as a person, that there are other things to enjoy in your life, that you will still be loved and respected and cared for and appreciated regardless of your body size, as long as you're surrounding yourself by the right people. And you also have to do that for yourself as well. At the end of the day, you have to be the one that's kind and respectful to yourself. And that means moving away from the really negative self criticism. And also, in terms of like practical work, it does mean that you have to step away from the tracking and self monitoring. You have to reduce the body checking or the body avoidance. You really have to do intentional work to practice self compassion and to reduce the preoccupation with your appearance. And if it really feels like this is not something, that you can do on your own, then it absolutely makes sense to reach out to a mental health professional or a dietitian, someone who works with folks who have even a subclinical eating disorder. Because I think one of the other things that's key to think about is that a relatively, I mean, in the bodybuilding community, it's a higher relative proportion of folks who have a clinical eating disorder, but more people have subclinical disordered eating patterns.
For
So
sure.
you might not qualify, as someone with a clinical eating disorder.
Mm.
That does not mean that your disordered eating habits are not having a negative impact. And what you can do if you catch it early enough is you prevent the progression into a clinical eating disorder.
Yeah, for sure. And this is the risky space as well, when which I touched on earlier, that where you're talking there, it really does relate to catching it early enough. I feel like there's this huge gap in the coaching space where the whoever it is does a preparation, And then
Mhm.
it's that you're at that vulnerable position where you're extremely lean, you've done your competition, maybe you got the placing you were after, maybe you didn't, which can obviously breed a whole world of shit.
Oh, yeah.
um,
Hmm.
and then it's like, even if you win, okay, so what's happening now? The season's over. The high likelihood of potential to binge or uncontrollably eat, maybe it's not a full binge, to incorporate new eating patterns that weren't there before, to then self-restrict. It is so high on the agenda, but I see it time and time again, and it genuinely breaks my heart. Eat what you want after the show is the coach's advice. And it's difficult in regards to I don't want to be going, don't listen to your coach and whatever. But when you're in
Yeah.
the scenario and you're thinking, and I speak to a multitude of people from the podcast that are then 4 or 5 months, away from the competition. They're in a position where they do not like their body, they can't control their eating, they do not know what to do. So, like you say, they're catching it. I feel like that's a very good example in the competitive bodybuilding realm where it's like, how are we catching this, guys, without the coaches actually seeing this? It is heartbreaking, like I say.
Yeah, you really need to have an off-boarding plan. That's with a physique competitor, even with recreational exerciser, like someone who wanted to lose weight and track macros. Macro tracking is not a permanent solution. Like that is not an intervention that is going to be appropriate for everyone until the end of their days. But so often, yeah, we don't have an offboarding. We have okay, we're going to increase your macros a little bit, but still we're keeping all of the same very restrictive, very rigid and stringent frameworks in place.
Yeah.
And that's not going to be helpful for them long term. Or, yeah, you have the, okay, well, just go back to what you were doing before. But a person who's gone through a prep phase or who has gotten to like their leanest physique ever, they're fundamentally changed at that point. Like their perspective about their bodies, about food, about what it means to make sort of like the right food choices, what it means to be consistent in the gym, that becomes more than just the behaviors. It becomes an evidence for them that they've made the right decisions, and so they're a good, hardworking, dedicated person. So doing anything less, doing something different, then becomes something negative.
Yeah.
So it's so important. Like even when we say like, oh, we're focusing on the process, it still is important that the person knows that if they go through a difficult phase in their life, or even if not, even if they're like, I don't want to compete anymore, or I don't want to, continue to pursue my smallest physique. I want to focus on art, or I want to spend more time with my kids, or I want to volunteer at a dog shelter. The fact that you're no longer tracking macros and you're not going to the gym 2 hours a day doesn't mean that you're undedicated or lazy or that you're not working hard enough or that you let yourself go. It means that you have recognized your values and priorities and you have shifted accordingly. I think that's one thing that people it's hard to see that, and it's almost something that we build into the process because we're like, wow, you stuck to your macros, you're really dedicated and determined. That's fine. We also need to say, wow, you decided to spend time with your kids. You decided to go get ice cream with them. That's really aligned with your values. You did that was a lot of integrity there. Those two things are different, but it's not that one is better than the other. It's part of being a whole complex human being that at times we do other things.
It is hard to embrace that when you are certainly in the realms. And I've found as well, I don't know if you've noticed this, there is certainly people that go into this sort of off-season phase. Maybe they realize that actually the post-show, doing the prep itself, it is bringing about, essentially food disorders or disordered
Mm-hmm.
eating, etc. And
Yeah.
they embark on the off-season, they get going, and then they're healthier. So the mind is a
Mm-hmm.
bit more, and we can't get away from the mind does go a little bit, of course, in the preparation. So you start to feel,
Mm-hmm.
right, I feel different now. And then that's when some people go, I'm not doing that again. I do not want to do that again because it's not right for me. Now that can be difficult as well because as you mentioned earlier, you've then got to, you feel like you've got to tell everyone on social media. You've got to, do all this stuff and I don't know if you see this on your side of the globe, as it were. But then it can turn into almost the bashing of bodybuilding because you then get, well, it wasn't right for me. And I noticed all these things happen to me. And what I've certainly noticed is that can then almost turn around into this negative space of this person's decided to step away. They're doing really well. They're nourishing their life. They're doing all these fantastic things. But there's an undercurrent of bodybuilding did this to me. Bodybuilding's really bad for you. And what I always think of, what about the bodybuilders that are still bodybuilding? And then it starts to cause this big divide, and we get this in the fitness space, don't we? It's like I'm the hard camp, I'm the this camp, I'm the this camp, and that's quite hard for budding bodybuilders. It's their whole life, they're doing really well, they're pursuing this. Yes, it's extreme, but they're still doing it. And then you see, that side of it as well, where it has to be this sort of, and I guess from your standpoint, being a practitioner in the space and trying to help people coming away from it as well, it's that balance, isn't it? To not just go bodybuilding is terrible, to try and nourish that if someone is stepping away, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely, because that is what I think makes these issues, like keeps them sort of invisible, because it does become these two camps where you have one camp that is, like super hardcore and normalizing these really problematic behaviors, and then making some people feel ashamed or afraid if they're having a hard time with those behaviors, and then seeing people on sort of the other end of the extreme that are like these behaviors are super problematic and bodybuilding needs to acknowledge them, but the people on the other side don't want to have the conversation with the other side, because they're so opposed.
Mm.
And so the way that I come at it is bodybuilding is a high risk sport. I view dieting in general, I call it a contact sport. Like
Yeah.
it's something that comes with inherent risk. People need to have the correct protective equipment, in terms of best practices. They
Yeah.
need to be able to provide informed consent. And for some people who have a chronic injury, like people who have a history of eating disorder or disordered eating, it's going to be almost certainly very harmful to them. And so it doesn't do anyone any good on either end to say, like, I'm not going to have a conversation with this side because of their views. It's so important that we say, you have bodily autonomy. If you want to pursue bodybuilding, you can do that. Here are the risks. Here are the pros and cons. Here's the risk for you, particularly, for you specifically, because you come from a certain background.
Yeah.
And it's the role and the responsibility of the coach also to identify when their client is exhibiting these behaviors and say, it is my professional opinion that pursuing a bodybuilding show or intentional weight loss would cause you a great deal of harm. And I'm not willing to do that. In the same way that when we see people who've gotten a lot of plastic surgery to the point that it's causing destruction, to their bones and their tissues, we
Mm.
say, why isn't the plastic surgeon telling them, hey, I shouldn't do this because it's going to be harmful to you? Or, we see someone like a professional athlete, their coach is not going to put them out on the field if they have a severe injury. They're going to say, like, sorry, we need to, rest and you need to recover. And we have the same responsibility that we need to say, hey, I see these patterns in you. Can we have a discussion about this? Here's why I'm concerned. What do you think? And this is why it would be really important for us to not do a show this season because this is going to get worse.
Yeah, I would also love to see in this space a bit more acknowledgement from coaches in themselves if they've got
Mm-hmm.
potentially an eating disorder or even
Yes.
disorders, behaviors, thought patterns, etc. Because I see it a lot more than I'd like to see it, of course, Gabrielle, where, they're almost gifting a food disorder to their clients. And
Yeah.
it, it's like, I've taken on plenty of clients from coaches previous. Again, I'm not trying to berate people, but it's like you're doing you're literally basing your whole life on this coach. And that
Mhm.
in itself, it goes down this domino effect. And then hopefully, if you then move coaching, you can work with someone else that actually acknowledges, because we can pick
Mhm.
it up, but the coach needs to want to spend time on helping that person as an individual and actually go, like you
Mhm.
say. And if this is out of your remit, if you're listening and you're a coach, because coaches do listen, if you're working with people and there's a food disorder, or whatever's of that nature, if you don't acknowledge it, this is going to potentially get worse and worse and worse. Seeking other advice or referrals, or building your own referral scheme with individuals in the space. And I do mention this, please, if you're listening, this is someone's life. This is their whole life where this can lead. And it's important that coaches acknowledge their own, what they're doing, because you see it on social media, don't you? It's like essentially there's people, influencers, coaches, etc. They're pretty much binging on social media. Maybe
Mhm.
they've got 80 clients that are then watching it going, oh, right, okay, my coach does that. And I think as well, I certainly second guess some of my stuff I share because I want it to be put across in the right way. Are you similar with that?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Because I try to work in the middle ground.
Yeah.
And and I'm at a place now like where I have done the work of like I've identified my biases, my disordered eating habits, and I've worked through those. uh, Coaches can be the folks who have the hardest time identifying those traits in themselves, let alone in their clients. And then, once acknowledging them, doing something about it.
Yeah.
So in the content that I create, I do try to use, analogies, like I said, with weight loss being or dieting being a contact sport. I what I try, like I say, I fortify my science with compassion. So I come at it from a place of empathy and compassion for both coaches and clients. Like I understand most people have good intentions. Like
Yeah.
most coaches want to help their clients. Most people are not aware of their internalized weight biases, of their internalized weight stigma. They don't know the sources for their insecurities or for the reasons that they want to get lean or for their disordered eating patterns. So I try to provide information that helps to shed light on those things and show how these patterns, these narratives affect not just our relationship with food, but our body image and our relationship with other people and how we show up in the workplace, our relationships and our families, and to provide solutions that can still meet people where they are. Because it doesn't make sense to say, like, oh, well, if you've been tracking macros for 15 years, just like start intuitive eating. That doesn't, it does not resonate with people. And, a lot of times people don't understand what intuitive eating actually is or what the pros and cons are of macro tracking. So I try to provide both sides where I say, like, macro tracking is not inherently, it doesn't cause eating disorders.
Mm.
Here's what the data actually says. Like, if you're in this category of people, macro tracking is probably fine. If
Mm.
you're in this other category of people, it poses a risk to you, and here's why. So I want my messaging to be able to reach a larger audience. And sometimes it means that I get negative feedback from like both sides of the extremes, which is fine. I feel like that's a sign that, oh, I'm doing what I need to be doing.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is one of those, because sometimes it's almost like there's an element of, I'll do the odd reel or something where it is a bit controversial. And,
Mm-hmm.
it's not really my vibe per se across all my social media. But sometimes I'm like, there's something
Mm-hmm.
I've seen far too many times here. I'm going to just do a reel about it, get it off my chest, as it were.
Yeah.
But, generally speaking, what are we trying to offer as people in a place of influence is education, empowerment, and to not feel alone. I feel like we resonate with that message. And
Mm-hmm.
again, it's the on the social media, can we offer someone that is potentially not able to afford a coach? Maybe they've done a prep or an extreme diet, photo shoot, etc. Then they've tanked their finances, and it's like, I don't know what to do here. I can't afford to employ someone like ourselves. I can't have a coach. So again, it's that as well, isn't it? Because it's not always that, they've got a bad coach, as it were, in quote marks, and that's been the whole. It's like they've only actually been able to afford the preparation, and they've then gone on their own But then it's like you're in this abyss. And when I take on a client for a prep, I always say, can we look at the financial stability, as it were, for at least 3 months after the preparation, and that allows a bit of time there. But I feel like again, it's like what free resources can we offer to people that can't afford us as coaches, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's something that I've been working on more in the last year is to create educational resources that have a more accessible price point or things that are just free, at least to help like a free survey for folks to gain more awareness about their relationship with food and macro tracking and guides and workbooks to help people take sort of a stepwise approach from I know that this is a problem, but I can't work with a coach right now, but what can I do instead of just, repeating the same patterns that I know are harmful? Because yeah, like times are, especially now, like times are tough. There's so much, sociopolitical unrest and uncertainty. And I really want to make sure that there is information, there are resources out there for folks that are more accessible than working with a coach.
Yeah, for sure. It is as well. Even that, portion of time where potentially you are, and you touched on it, facing challenges in life, or maybe
Mm-hmm.
you're injured. Maybe you're not having a coach for that reason as well. And then you've got that whole world of, what do I do here? And I feel like, you're going to agree with me here. Even just doing the fundamentals of bodybuilding to a good level, that could be almost that gateway, couldn't it? Having a good amount of fluid, having your protein, your micronutrient, the basic stuff that are like the pillars. They're things that promote a healthy lifestyle. Again, you get into bodybuilding, if you go straight into a prep or however you do it, you're not even building that foundation there. You're just thrown in, and it's like, whoa. Sometimes I wish that people could almost just enjoy the principles of bodybuilding a bit more for that, because there's so much that can come from that. My lifestyle clients, it's an absolute pleasure to just help people essentially be able to take hold of that part of their life and just install eating habits, go out for a meal and enjoy it. And it seems very novel, but I'm sure you're the same. It's like I wish more people could just be able to do that as a lifestyle, because it brings so much, going out walking, the easy things. But as bodybuilders, it's like I have to be the most extreme person in the whole world. Otherwise, I'm not validating this. Now, if someone does get injured, or there's maybe a health consequence off the back of a prep, something like that, do you work with anyone in that scenario where it's sort of like they're almost forced out of bodybuilding to competitive level?
I mean, I wouldn't work with folks who are in a medical sense. I don't like, help with rehab and whatnot.
Yeah.
I've certainly have worked with athletes who are working also with another health professional, like they're working with their physical therapist. In many cases, I also recommend that folks work with a mental health specialist so that, we get the nice overlap of where wellness and lifestyle coaching can intersect with actual, clinical therapy if that's something that seems indicated for the person. But yeah, I definitely have worked with folks who are feeling frustrated, like their bodies are working against them, because they have an injury or something has, something in their lives have some circumstances changed. And so they don't feel like they have enough control or agency in their lives. And injuries can also be one of the sort of triggers for progressing into an eating disorder because people are feeling really worried about weight gain, losing their physique, their conditioning. So they become even more strict. Or, I've definitely worked with folks who are dealing with some sort of disruption like that, and they want like a more strict macro plan. They want this sense of control back and really like macro tracking. Sometimes it can feel like, oh, the only thing that I can have control over or feel that I achieved was, I hit my macros at the end of the day. And really, that is just a surrogate. And so I think it's really important to help folks gain a sense of safety and agency that comes from within, that they can really cultivate that self provide, like the self sufficient sense of security. So even if they're not tracking macros, they're like, well, I'm making values aligned decisions. I'm doing things to take care of myself. Like I'm in a season of recovery and recuperation right now. And, if I push my body, I'm not going to recover. So helping them really to shift those narratives, I think makes a big difference in supporting their recovery and also preventing them from progressing to a place where they have more disordered behaviors.
Because you've outlined that perfectly. It's like, shit, what can I control? You know,
Mm-hmm.
suddenly everything's like, and again, it's like, and I thought I might be here after my surgery last year. I thought, oh God, am I going to be trying to do multiple things to try and be in a deficit and everything else? Guys,
Mm-hmm.
you got to remember you're trying to recover here. So whether it's surgery or an injury, maybe you're going through rehab, whatever it is, the body needs the fuel, and we forget that because we're like, yeah, but I've gained a pound, and that pound is like that's your whole life has changed here, and then you're thinking, is it going to keep going up? And
Mm-hmm.
for some reason, this triggered in my mind is to ask you, do you deal with people, or have you spoken with people that essentially cling on to stimulant use off the back of a prep? I know it's a massive tangent there, but I was just thinking of the sort of addictive nature and essentially trying to stay lean. There's like your
Mm-hmm.
Hitline, Clen, this type of stuff. Do
Mm-hmm.
you come across
Mm-hmm.
that?
I haven't really worked with folks who use PEDs or who use those types of stimulants. I
Mm.
certainly have worked with folks who still use a lot of energy drinks and whatnot, and they're still really under eating. They're still chronically under fueling. And then they're trying to overcome the fatigue and the brain fog and whatnot with a lot of caffeine. And then that has, a negative effect on their GI tract and their sleep. So it's this sort of self-perpetuating cycle of I feel like garbage,
Yeah,
and I'm going to try and put all these band-aids on it. And then the band-aids, hurt when you rip them off. And so they aren't actually getting to the core, which is you're under fueling. And that's something that so many grifters in the health and fitness community will really prey on because they're like, oh, do you have brain fog? Are you tired? You need this supplement or you need to do a gut reset or whatever it is. And I'm like, or you're constipated. No, you don't need a reset. You need to be eating more than 1,000 calories a day. Like, you need to eat more so that you can sleep properly. And I like the number of people that I've worked with that, have been chronically under eating. We work together, they bring their food up. I've had people say, like, wow, I thought that I was kind of like a grumpy bitchy person. And I'm not. I was just really hungry all the time. Or like, wow, I remember after my bodybuilding show when I started eating again, I felt like I had woken up. I felt like I'd been in a coma, and I'm like, oh, my brain is working. And people have better performance in the gym and they have like more comfortable bowel movements. They're like, oh my gosh, I'm not constipated. Like I just feel regular now, and it's like, yeah, because you needed to eat enough. Like that is so foundational. Then you sleep better, you have more energy, you enjoy your workouts more. So one of the, people talk about like reverse dieting and, the practice of increasing your calories gradually over time. If you really have no idea what your maintenance is, it makes sense to do that.
yeah,
But not to drag it out for a super long period of time. And it's not boosting your metabolism. You aren't suddenly burning 800 more calories a day. You just have way more energy. So you are expending more because like you're walking around, you're working harder in the gym. So I think that it's just this very pervasive misconception and people are so used to feeling tired and low energy and then trying to use caffeine that it maybe doesn't really dawn on them. It's not like the first thought of, oh, I need to eat more because that sounds like a huge threat. Eating more? No, I could gain weight and that's like the worst possible thing that could happen.
yeah. There's nothing better than when you take a client on and they've been dieting. I mean, not for them, but for when you get the result of, they've been dieting on such low calories and you put the calories up and they actually lose weight, they look better, they feel better. And it's like, holy shit, what is this magic? And it's like, it's just actually treating you as an individual and a human that I care about, and it is like this
Yes.
magical thing. And then, of course, like you say, a coach's job in the physique realm, we're going to be collecting data, what's the maintenance, etc., etc. But again,
Hmm.
that can ebb and flow, and this is how I describe it. It's like the more phases you do, the more you get used to intensity in the gym, all of these different things. Actually, your maintenance can change, and that's an ever working masterpiece, as it were. But that's the
Yeah.
exciting part, isn't it? Because ideally, and this is a flex, ladies that are listening, if you can, over seasons, if you're a competitor, if you can be able to creep your calories up higher in an off season, keep your body composition where it needs to be with your coach, etc., you can diet on higher calories, and that is a good thing. It's a good thing. But again, it's like, well, no, I'll do the 1,000 calorie thing. I've been there. It's like, oh, I've done,
Yeah.
and it's savage. It's so savage, but you feel that you'll
Hmm.
do, what you need to do. But if over time you can change that narrative and go, maybe I could diet on more calories, it's excellent, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's about having the minimal level, it's like the minimum effective dose,
Yeah.
right? Like you don't get extra points on stage if your prep sucked the most. Like you can enjoy your prep, I mean, to the greatest extent possible. And then, you can get on stage and still perform really well, and you have a less of a negative impact on your health and your quality of life. There is something about, I think, like a sense of, I want to say like martyrdom in a way. Like people say, they want to be seen suffering because it's almost like that's synonymous with hard work. But it's not. It's just, it could be just unnecessary suffering. Like you don't necessarily, if you can get the same results training, um, to a reasonable extent that you still have energy to do enjoyable things and spend time with your family, and you don't need to make yourself throw up. Why would you work so hard that you make yourself throw up? Like that's just, we talk so much about junk volume.
Yeah.
There can be junk effort
Yeah.
where you have now, you've overshot, and now the subsequent couple of days you can't perform.
Yeah.
And when I used to track my steps and things like that. I noticed that when I was in a deficit, I wasn't pacing, I wasn't fidgeting, and I have ADHD, so I am naturally a fidgeter. I would barely be able to break 8,000 steps because I would just be so tired and low energy. And I did the nerdiest thing possible. I tracked my steps and my macros, my caloric intake, and my weight modification. And I found that there was actually a U shaped curve where if my calories were too low or too high, my weight loss was actually slower than if I hit right in the sort of sweet spot where I was like, I have enough energy to train and hit my step goals, and I'm also maintaining a deficit. So it was like, that it was just really great evidence of what I already suspected. I'm like, my steps are really low. Why do I don't think I can make it to 10,000. And then when I was eating, at maintenance or in a little bit of an excess, I was like, oh, 12,000 easy.
Mm.
So I think it's just, it's that finding that sweet spot, finding that minimum effective dose. We talk about it with training. The same goes for nutrition. The same goes for restriction. Like we don't need to be doing the most. We don't need to be suffering the most. That doesn't make us better athletes.
For sure, for sure. And tying that in as well to realizing that actually some people do need to go very low calorie, but also it's how
Mm-hmm.
you frame that. And I talk about this a lot, the choice to do this. There's people in the world
Mm-hmm.
that are in poverty and they don't have a choice. We're choosing to do this as if we call it a sport or, bodybuilding as it were. I know some people like it's
Mm-hmm.
not a sport, but if you're doing it, it's more than likely you're going to think of it as a sport. And it's like, actually, if you do need to do these things, again, being able to own that and, sort of get excited for it in a cathartic way and be able to do that. But it is, I really like that. I thought of that because when you say suffering, it's like if you're telling yourself, if the narrative is, I'm suffering, I shouldn't have to do this, I shouldn't have to do that, it's probably not the right endeavor for you because you don't have to do it. And that, again, it ties into everything we said today. You don't have to do any of this. You can,
Yeah.
have a healthy lifestyle, as it were, however that looks for you. But it
Mm-hmm.
is, and right back to where I mentioned that you picked up on who bodybuilding can attract, again, not everyone. It's like, are you almost wanting to tell yourself, this is traumatic, I deserve this pain, I don't deserve to eat, I have to do this, I have to do this. That's obviously a very complex case, and it's going to be individual to the person, but it can bring about that as well, which is it's psychological warfare, isn't it, Gabrielle? It's literally, you're so tied into it. It would be hard to outline the steps, as it were, to go, right, if you're listening and you're in this space, because we've already spoken about that. But I feel like, even listening to a podcast like this, perhaps it offers that bit of like, am I doing these things? Is it right for me? And if someone is listening, a bit of an extension of the advice we've given, but if someone's listening and they don't have a partner, they haven't got a coach and they don't really have support networks. Do you find, other than the sort of free resources and what we do on Instagram, etc., is there anything in your neck of the woods or anything you'd sort of give as referrals to people that can seek sort of those first steps, if you know what I mean?
Yeah. I wish there were more resources. There is NEDA, that's the National Eating Disorders Awareness or Association. But that is a website that has resources, free resources in terms of information, and then ways that you could contact health professionals that are qualified to work with folks with eating disorders.
Okay.
There is a lot to be said too about self-help. Self-help books can be really helpful. I mean, that's very repetitive, but they can be very effective for folks. But again, it has to be the right type of self-help book. I mean, there are is an unregulated industry. There are people who would further perpetuate the idea that suffering is noble, even when it's suffering for no real cause to benefit anyone else. And I see that that is really pervasive, especially among men, that there's a lot of messaging around, ignoring pain and ignoring, like not having, difficult emotions and working it out in the gym anyway. Instead, like, no, go to therapy
Mm.
is one of the most effective things you can do is find a good therapist. The gym is not therapy. Your friends are not therapy. Like it cannot replace the expertise of someone who has studied human psychology and can actually give you interventions to help. So even if you don't have that support network, you can still find those types of resources. But seek out resources that are more evidence based, that are going to be helpful for addressing your actual issues, which usually are going to be things like perfectionism and self criticism. And also seek out positive role models. Like there are really excellent people in the bodybuilding space. Like, I mean, I've talked about Eric Helms so many times. He is like the Captain America, like the just a moral compass, for the bodybuilding community. He
Yeah.
speaks, he speaks frankly and from an evidence-based perspective about the risks of bodybuilding, and he talks about the importance of having a really intentional off season and not tracking macros forever. 3DMJ, like that company, the way that they practice, yes, like there are really fantastic folks to follow who will be honest with you and who will also be kind and don't bring in any of like the toxic masculinity or the extremely disordered behaviors. They say like you can be a natural competitor, you can still be really effective. If you're going to use peds, like here are the risks, do it in an informed way. So I think that's like you have to cultivate what information you are consuming. Definitely helps to have someone else who can be there to say, hey, I've had this conversation with clients when they've come to me with statements from another influencer or something, and this person's like, has run until both of their feet were broken and then kept running. And, they create a lot of rhetoric around that being a noble pursuit. And so now my client is like, should I be tracking macros again? Like, I feel bad that I'm not, and it's just after years of not tracking. And it's just like, oh my gosh, but to say, hey, this is where this person's narrative is coming from. it doesn't sound like it's really that aligned with your values. It sounds like this is coming from a place of where you're feeling maybe some shame or some guilt. Let's talk about that. You don't want your decisions to be coming from fear, shame, or guilt. You want to make decisions from a place of agency and values and integrity.
For sure. I absolutely love that. And actually, as well, we're talking about, maybe the help of a psychologist or something of that nature. And I
Mm-hmm.
literally had a guest on as part of this series as well. And she said she's a bodybuilding psychologist labeled as her Instagram handle. And she said the gym's not therapy. And it's the first time in 3 years I've had someone say that on the podcast. And you've just said that as well. And that, you pick up things, don't you, on a podcast? You're like, I'm going to remember that forever. Because it was like, I've been there, I'm sure you have, where it's like, I have to go to the gym, that's my therapy. And it's like, actually, really, it's either a band-aid or you're just going there and then you're going back to the shit after it. So it's like, it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
disappear, if things are going on as well. Extension of if people haven't got anyone. If anyone's listening that's actually in a position where everyone around them saying you should be doing the bodybuilding, competing, including perhaps their intimate partner, everyone around them, and they don't want to. Have you had circumstances like that where people have reached out like, I don't, yeah, okay, because that would
Mm-hmm.
be
Yeah.
an interesting thing to talk about.
Oh, absolutely. And even just, with non-competitors, with folks that are like, oh, my family says just some rude stuff at the holidays, or I feel a lot of pressure, a lot of peer pressure, or the people in my gym are doing a juice cleanse or a weight loss challenge. And there's so much messaging, that we get from social media. And so people do feel a sense of pressure and guilt and anxiety and fear about not fitting in, about not going with the crowd. Because at the core, I mean, we all need to have a sense of safety. We have evolved as social animals. We need to know that there's at least one other person around who can help us because we have not we can't do everything on our own. Like, if we're thinking back to, the beginning of Homo sapiens, like you can't raise babies alone, you can't gather food and hunt and fend off predators alone. So the thought of being an outcast, of being judged and ridiculed by our peers is it's a visceral threat.
Yeah.
And so, when I talked earlier about getting that sense of safety in yourself, that comes also from intentional effort. And like, it doesn't come from, the gym. Yeah, that can make you feel empowered in a specific way, but you still have to practice the skills of self-compassion and getting in touch with your values and practicing the difficult steps of maybe limiting people in your life. I talk a lot about your time and energy are you're in charge of those. No one else is going to value or protect your time and energy like you will. And so when you are so preoccupied with what everyone else thinks about you, you're giving away your time and energy. You're giving away your life essence, if you want to get into like, kind of a woo area, but you are putting everyone else in charge of your life. And that is, even though it can feel safe, that's a false sense of security because now you're dependent on everyone else to say, hey, yeah, you're doing a good job. Like, you're allowed to hang out with us. And those are not the people that should really be allowed in your space. The people that are allowed in your space are the ones that will support you when you say, hey, I don't want to do this anymore. This isn't good for my health, my mental or physical health. The people in your life that should be there are the ones that are going to say, I support you in doing what is best for you. And they're also the ones that are going to say, hey, it looks like you're doing something that's harmful to you, and I'm worried about you. Like, we don't need to be fitting in with a bunch of yes men who are probably also trying to fit in with everyone else. Like, that is an exhausting way to live. And it is one of the things that my clients really struggle with because it's not just in the gym or with their friends. They have a hard time setting boundaries and asserting themselves with their partner, with their family, at work, because you brought up early, like, I don't deserve to eat, like I should be suffering. People who don't think that they deserve respect are not going to require that from others, and they're not going to give it to themselves. So it's about helping clients realize, no, you are deserving of respect. You can say no to things. You can also say yes to things.
For sure.
Like like it just helping them regain the actual sense of agency. Not, oh, I feel in control of my life because I'm hitting my macros, but I feel in control of my life because I set a boundary with a family member, or I used, a helpful skill. I do like the shit sandwich when you want to say no to someone, like, thanks for inviting me. I can't do that. Thanks for inviting me. But I'm not going to be doing that, like those skills to help them feel more centered and grounded and in charge of their lives. That's what really, really, really helps people transform.
Yeah. And actually, as well, when we relate this to physique development, when you're more, I don't know if mentally sound is the right way to put it, but when you manage your stress better, when you're, really working on your own mindset, your self-development, watch your
Mm-hmm.
physique respond as well. Because we forget about that huge portion of physique development is managing stress. And I mean, there's probably going to be people listening going, "What do you mean? What?" And even though I talk about it, and that's the thing with a podcast. Sometimes you'll pick up parts, right? And then it's like, oh, and this is why I repeat some stuff, but the management of stress in itself, I mean, we could do a 5 hour podcast about that because it's such a big thing. Before we wrap up, I have to ask you, and this might feed into a bit of that. Where was your Instagram handle created?
Oh, the trust and nourish.
Yeah, because I'm like, is it to do with, self-development, managing stress, that type of stuff?
It's so funny. So I used to be Vitamin PhD. That was my handle for since 2017 when I first went on Instagram. And my old content was really focused on, I called it like your daily dose of evidence-based nutrition, like vitamin PhD, So I spoke much more about supplements and sport nutrition and weight modification. And I still find like supplements and things like that really interesting. But over the years, and then I started speaking much more about gut health. And still, it was like, this is evidence based information provision. But in the last year, I've changed my content so much. I mean, it's been a gradual progression, but in the last year, especially, I said, I'm not going to do gut health content anymore. Like every once in a while, I'll still do a webinar. I still provide, like I'm a gut health science communicator, but it just was not where my passions really were. And it's not what I help most of my clients with.
Yeah.
And I've spoken to so many clients about the idea of self-trust. Like we don't track macros. We use RPE eating. That's the thing that I've borrowed from, RPE and training. We apply the same principles to eating and to training. And I realized like really the core of what I'm helping people to do is to establish trust in themselves. Like they trust their bodies, they trust their ability to respond to their internal cues, they trust that they will be okay. Like they trust themselves to meet their needs. They trust themselves to keep themselves safe. They trust themselves to make sound decisions. And then from there, like the nourishment comes in not just in terms of physical nourishment, but overall nourishment. Like you feel more nourished as an individual when you have a set of, a social circle and hobbies, and you can still do bodybuilding and that's part of your lifestyle, it's part of your hobbies, it's your sport, and you also do pottery or something like that, like so that you feel you're you don't have uh a nutrient deficiency in life, if
Sure.
that makes sense.
Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
love that. I was like, I'm gonna have to ask you because even that in itself, right? Trust in yourself. I mean, I never thought you mentioned this perfectly earlier. I never thought I'd be able to fully trust myself on this journey, and I've actually literally just started coaching myself. And
Mm-hmm.
I've had coaches for 12 years, and something switched inside me, and I thought. I'm going to do this myself. I know what I'm doing, but I've got to
Yeah.
trust myself here. And I literally did a post yesterday saying, The old me could have gone, I'm gonna go fucking all in here. I've just started a small diet phase. And the old me would have gone Sarah Goggins, and I'd be, doing everything. And, because and it's not trying to be, arrogant or anything, but I can diet, right? I can push myself to these levels and do whatever's required.
Mhm.
But I thought, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to test myself and trust myself and try and have a, good amount of food going in, manage expenditure and stuff. So I really like that you've actually said that because again, it's like, can we fully trust ourselves at times? And I believe we can. We've got a power within, and it's on us at times, isn't it, to embrace that superpower of like, you're a person as well, guys. Like, you're not just a competitor. You do have a name, and you're a person. But of course, thank you so much for today. I've really enjoyed talking to you because it's certainly new insights as well. And yeah, it's just a really good chat. So thank you.
Thank you as well. It was really fantastic.
Thank you very much. I'm sure I will speak to you soon.
Yeah.
See you later.
Bye.